Okay, at this time, I have unmuted all of the members of the Athens Township Zoning Commission. And I've also unmuted consultant Bob Eichenberg. We welcome you all here to the April 29th public hearing of the Athens Township Zoning Commission to go over a proposed zoning map and a proposed zoning code.
Okay.
I will continue to welcome more participants as they come in. I'll try to bring them in batches so I don't have to start all over again.
All right. So yeah, this is Sean Jones. I'm the chairman of the commission. I'd like to call this meeting to order. What we'd like to do this evening is review the code the commission's been working on and take public comment so that we might make changes before it's voted on this November. I'd like to identify the members of the commission. All of them are lifelong residents of the Plains. All are concerned with returning control of the Plains and what it becomes to the residents of the Plains. When the Athens Township trustees called for the commission to create a code for the residents of the Plains to consider, it brought together really a wide variety of residents. I mean, we have everybody here. And we really have done our very best to create a balanced code that will hopefully protect the rights of the citizens of Plains and allow the Plains to grow in a balanced manner. One thing we did not want to recreate is the city of Athens. It's just an entirely different code than what we're trying to aim for. So I'd like to ask the members of the commission to introduce themselves, maybe say how long they've been living in the Plains and why they wish to be on the commission. Like say, Sean Jones, I'm the chairman, and I've been here for 30 years, I think, somewhere near there. Brian?
Sure. My name is Brian Deering, and I am the vice chair. And I was born in Oblennis Hospital and brought home to Clinton Street in the Plains. So I've been here 36 years, if my math is right.
I'm Ken Robinson. I'm the secretary of the commission. I've been a resident of the Plains for about 40 years.
Hi, I'm Rick Furno. I'm a member of the commission. We moved here after I retired, and we've lived here about 7 years now.
Mike
Hornsby, 39 years.
So Mike holds the record.
Ken said 40.
About
Okay.
39, about 39.
And we also have Tina Thornton as an alternate. Tina, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Well, somehow
She's muted.
Yeah. Let me unmute Tina.
How about that? Will that
Yeah,
work?
You're
There
good.
you go.
Anyway, my name is Tina Thornton. I moved here last September. I love it, the convenience. I mean, I just love it. But I noticed that there could be a few improvements as far as zoning goes. So I just went down to see what was going on, and it was so interesting that I stayed and have really enjoyed the whole process. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, now what I'd like to do is I'd like to open the meeting to a presentation by Brian Deering regarding the code, the big overview of the code, and how it might relate to a public survey that we did, and how it answers different questions on that survey. What does the code do? What does the code not do? Brian, if you could take over the meeting.
Sure, sure thing. I'd also like to welcome the township trustees, Steve Pearson, Brian Baker, and Ted Linscott. Also, we have Zach Saunders from the Athens County Prosecutor's Office, and just a congratulations to Zach on his election victory last night. He'll be the Democratic candidate for probate and juvenile judge come November. He's here to answer any questions that are in the lawyer's realm. So we're happy to have him and thankful he's here and thankful to see the trustees here. We also have Bob Eichenberg. He is from, I believe it's Round River Planning.
That's correct.
And the commission hired Bob to be our consultant and help us along this process, since none of these lifelong members of the Plains have ever written a zoning code from scratch. So we're thankful for his help, and yeah. So let's go ahead, and I'd also like to remind everyone, I'm in control of the mics for this portion of the meeting. I'm going to give information, and then afterwards we're going to invite the public to participate. You see me as Steve Pearson. We're using the Township Trustees Zoom account, so I've logged in as Steve. And the other thing I want to say is periodically I have to stop two more things. Periodically I will need to stop the screen share to admit more participants. And since this is a public meeting, we need to record the meeting for public record and reference. So you are already being recorded. So I appreciate your participation, and I look forward to hearing from you after we get some information out. So we're going to start the screen share, and if the members who are unmuted can go ahead and tell me, can you see the screen share successfully?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So we're going to give you a little background on the zoning. First of all, in the past several years, there's been some neighborhood discussion that it seems like people who are outside the Plains are taking advantage of residents of the Plains. And a couple years back, in the spring of 2018, is really when the movement got moving. I know that many of the township trustees were contacted with many things on Clinton Street. That is why I got involved. You also had some residents concerned about other areas of the Plains. Zoning came up at a meeting. I brought it forward to the trustees, and the trustees laid a challenge on me, and that was put some boots on the ground, put some rubber on the pavement, go around and show that this is not just a small group. So we went around and got a couple hundred signatures actually, and on a petition, and submitted them in August of 2018. The trustees decided they wanted to investigate a little bit more as to the possibilities of making a comprehensive zoning plan that also included Dover Township. And that's when the county commissioners and the regional planning commission got involved. And in the fall, you had citizens of the Plains, Warren Jeffers and myself, along with the trustees, take part in work on the regional planning commission, a subcommittee. After that regional planning commission, it was recommended that the county take over, and I think it's safe to say the county passed. Dover Township and Athens Township tried to work together, and Dover Township wasn't feeling maybe the same urgency as the folks in the Athens Township, so their trustees opted not to participate. Athens Township stood by its word and created this commission, and we are thankful for them doing so. And the Township Zoning Commission was formed in September of 2019. It's been active since then, and it meets in regular session the second, third, and fourth Wednesdays at 6 p.m. at the Plains Public Library when there's not a global pandemic. Sean has already gone over the members of the committee. And Sean, I will throw back to you real quick to talk about the mission and what you think are the key points of the mission.
Yeah, the whole point of this exercise, which is to create the code in the Plains, is, I mean, code really allows the residents of the area to gain control of what happens in their area. It keeps a fireworks factory from being built next to somebody's house. It keeps there from being too much density, so that if there is an emergency vehicles can get through. And that's the whole point of it. Is it just seemed like more and more of the Plains was gradually getting built up by people who didn't live here, landlords who maybe for out of town and out of town property owners. One of the most important things that I held in mind when I was doing the helping work on the code was I wanted the code to be as clear and as fair as possible. I hate things that are open to random interpretation of someone. So it comes down to a point where you have to try to make things as clear as possible, but also not go into every teeny little detail, because otherwise the code ends up being thousands of pages. But one of the main goals that we had, or the two main goals we had, are to give residents of the Plains control of what happens here again, and also to try to make the code clear enough that'd be fair to everyone, so that there are certain parts of the country where if you want to do something in the city, you have to get permission. There's essentially no approved uses. And that essentially just is a open invitation to a good old boy network or a corruption. So we tried to make this code as clear as we could, and to allow uses and allow people to do what they wanted to inside of the code. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Sean. We do have a couple timelines to meet moving forward to get this on the ballot, and I'm going to ask our consultant, Bob Eichenberg, to jump in here and talk about those.
Okay, sure. If there are no major changes to the code as it currently exists and is being presented after this hearing, the Regional Planning Commission will receive a copy and a notice that it's their turn to comment. And from the time they get it, they have 20 days to either approve it or hold their own hearing. At that point, it then goes to the township trustees, and they also have a hearing process. All of this has to be done within the time frame of an August 5th submission to the Board of Elections. And the trustees are basically operating under the same rules the Zoning Commission is, in that if there are major changes that are presented and that they want to go forward with after their hearing, then another hearing has to be held with 30 days notice. So we're hoping at this earlier stage to get the, if there are any major changes, to get that worked out now. And of course, this is all shooting for the November 3rd general election ballot.
Thank you, Bob. And I would like to emphasize that nothing is set in stone at this point, and ultimately the citizens of this area that is proposed to be zoned have the ultimate say. It's not the citizens of the whole township, it's the citizens of the area affected, and on November 3rd, they would be given special ballots based on their address, is what I've been told from Warren Jeffers, who has been a precinct chair or a captain or something very important on election day for a number of years. So when we created the map, we tried to create consistency over large areas, and we tried to keep it as simple as we could. We didn't want a map that looked zigzagged, like we had gerrymandered certain properties in and certain properties out. We wanted it to be very clean, very clear. We also wanted a focus for the future. And a really good way of seeing this on the proposed map is this area right here. And can you guys see my mouse move on the screen? Can I get a thumbs up?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this area right here, you guys know as a giant hill with a lot of trees. That's kind of above Shady Lane. But years ago, there was a road, I've learned, that connected Porter to Valley. And that road could be opened. And if these owners wanted to go through the process of making a development, they could do so. So we wanted to include areas to allow the Plains to expand and grow in the future. So here is the proposed zoning code, and we have, or the zoning map, and you can get a larger detail of this if you download it from the township website and kind of zoom in if you want to see where your property is or property you're potentially looking to buy. Notice that, again, trying to get those big chunks. This is not a map that's polka dotted, or at least it's trying not to be polka dotted, with little bits and individual properties here and there are, you know, one color and everything else is another color. These are usually big chunks of land that are all the same color. And that's something that we thought was very critical. The survey. We needed information twofold. As part of our contract with Bob Eichenberg, he has made a comprehensive plan, which is still under revision. And that will be given, I believe, to the township trustees. And he needed data for that comprehensive plan, and we needed data to help guide some of the zoning code that we were making. So we originally advertised the survey. It was actually, there was Fred Kite made a very nice article in the Athens News. And we thank the Athens News very much for publishing that article and helping us get some much needed publicity for our zoning efforts. We have the township's website, which has recently been redone, and we might look at that later, but I want to encourage you guys all to check out that website. The Zoning Commission Facebook page, please join if you aren't a member already or a follower already. And it was also posted on the Plains Chansey Neighborhood Facebook group. We got 125 people to respond to the survey. And you can see from some of the initial survey results that the grand majority, close to 2/3 of the people, have lived in the Plains longer than 10 years. So if you've lived here longer than 10 years, I think you qualify as pretty passionate about your neighborhood. As a high school government teacher, I would love for you guys to find a magic way to get those under the age of 18 involved in local civics, because nobody responded who was below the age of 18, but you can see the age breakdown there. When you think about the future of the Plains, what do you think the focus of development should be? And if you look, the grand majority, 72%, said a mix of both residential and business uses. And I want to return to our map to show that we listened. We listened to what the folks of the Plains, those 125 people who took that survey. And if you look, we have chunks of residential, we have chunks of smaller business, and we have places in the township's proposed map where we could welcome larger business. Oh. What do you like best about the Plains? 71% of folks, and you can see this survey over here, and this survey will be posted. We just decided that at the last meeting, will be posted on our township website so that the folks who took the survey can come back and see how the survey worked out. But 71% of those folks wanted easy access to surrounding areas. We address this in the zoning code by separating residential and business districts. For example, you're not going to be seeing a high traffic business in the middle of a very much a family residential neighborhood, single family residential neighborhood. That creates traffic where the road infrastructure is not appropriate for that type of traffic. People like easy access. They don't like traffic jams trying to turn left. They also tend to like safe families or safe roads for their families to have children play, their grandkids play. And we wanted to make sure that we kept businesses that brought in a lot of traffic separate from residential areas. They also like the small town feel, 69%. This code does not have a downtown like Athens or Nelsonville. There's no Victorian Square. There's no uptown. We don't intend to zone the Plains into, you know, the the uptown Athens, where you have the road, parking spaces, 10 feet of a sidewalk, and then a business immediately adjacent to the sidewalk. We don't feel like that is what we want as the Plains. We want more green space. We don't want people stacked on top of each other. So that's seen in the zoning code. We have setbacks from the road, green spaces on main drags and in business districts. We have screening added to the code to keep business districts separate from residential areas. So you still keep that community, small town community feel, and, you know, not looking out your back window and seeing a drive-through. So we really tried our best to keep that small town feel within the code, but also allow areas where we could have future development. If a larger box store wanted to locate into the Plains, there's areas where they can do that, and that's reflected in our code. What do you like the least? Well, people really didn't like drug usage, property crimes, and concerns about safety. And you know what? I would sleep better at night if all of those things were gone. Unfortunately, there are some things that zoning can take care of and zoning can't. So zoning can't deal with those. But I encourage you, and as part of this, I encourage you to reach out to your elected officials and express to them your concerns about these issues. There are creative solutions, and we have creative elected officials who are willing to respond to the people if the people come forward and let them know what your concerns are. Concerns about property values. No one wants to try to sell a house after a fireworks factory has moved in next door. Becomes very hard. And if you do sell it, you're not going to get what you put into it. So zoning has actually been shown to improve property values. And that kind of relates to the next one, is some people are saying my property value goes up, my taxes go up. And that is a concern. Taxes are too high. But really what zoning provides is a midpoint between the status quo, which we feel like a majority of the Plains does not accept currently, and incorporation into a village or a city. If we incorporated, there's a really good chance, if we had to pay the salaries of mayors and village councils and start having our own road crews, we would probably have even higher taxes than we do now. Chansey is actually an example of an incorporated village that does have a higher tax rate, those residents in that village. So, other things. It would concern me if my neighbors had a buildup of trash piles and debris, and we've addressed that in multiple sections of the code. First of all, we've addressed that in a section about the buildup of junk, and we thought it was necessary also to protect the community. And to protect the community, to protect the residents of rental housing, to add in a rental housing code, which we'll talk more about later. But in my experience, owners always take better care of their property than renters. And if you notice from this code, it is explicitly written in the rental housing code that a buildup of trash piles and debris is not something that the Plains residents want. It would concern me if my neighbors had inoperable cars or other vehicles on their property. So the code does address this, and we've had some pushback, some feedback from people who took only 2 people took a feedback survey after reading the code, and some folks were very concerned about what we were going to do with cars. And I do realize that there are a lot of people that have hobbies working on cars or trying to fix up an old muscle car. My dad does that. And I understand that. But 77% of the Plains near 4/5 of the planes are concerned with inoperable cars and junk vehicles. Now, junk vehicles are not something that is arbitrarily defined. A junk vehicle is any motor vehicle that meets all of these standards, and that is defined actually in Ohio Revised Code as well. So in some ways, we're just reaffirming Ohio Revised Code on what a junk vehicle is. Do any of the other zoning commissioners want to jump in there? I'm going to take a second to stop screen sharing and let people in.
Well, you should mention that the junk vehicle is a problem only when it's outside. It's okay if it's in an enclosed building.
That's true. There were no new participants, but I just wanted to check and make sure everyone was getting the opportunity to participate. And as Commissioner Furno said, as long as you're working in a garage, you can keep whatever you want in your garage as far as your vehicle in whatever state or manner you want it to be in. And that's something important as well. But when the vehicle is sitting out on your lawn and the stereotype of the tree growing up through the transmission, that becomes a little problematic for your neighbors. And before I move forward, I'm going to, there's someone that's waving me down for a second, and nope. Okay. So I'm going to go back to screen share. Sorry about that, just trying to accommodate everybody. It would concern me if my neighbors had a business that generates noise and traffic. This is addressed through our various zones. Again, 66% of folks said that. And if you look at our section of the zoning code where it explicitly lays out in table format what's permitted in each district, if you look at all of these types of businesses, and there's more, you can see that none of these businesses are allowed to locate in R1. And very few of them, that's single family area. R2 would be duplex and triplex area, a little bit more dense population. Conditional use only, so with bed and breakfast with a couple stipulations. R3, again, you have very few other things that are allowed in R3s as far as businesses go. We do think our business section is robust. And we allow for plenty of businesses to operate in different sections of the proposed zoning area. It would concern me if my neighbors had large livestock like pigs or cows. 61% of folks responded to that on the survey. And if you see, we've defined what livestock is. We've also, on the table, again, explicitly put where livestock is allowed and where they are not allowed. Livestock is allowed on a large lot rural zoned area, so not completely banned. Just need to have appropriate space to respect your neighbors and respect the animals. And this is also in keeping with, I believe, the agriculture boards. The portion of our code that deals with agriculture is in keeping with their policies. You are allowed to keep small domestic animals under certain conditions, certain numbers as well. So things like chickens, ducks, and rabbits. I know that there are a couple of people in the plains that are raising urban chickens in coops, and they seem to be doing well. It would concern me if my neighbors had a building too close to my property. Let's face it. We right now have almost no guidance when we are building something. And if your neighbor goes out and builds a shed in the back corner of their lot, who's to say they're not actually building it on your property or another neighbor's property? that's why I think one of the reasons zoning is important. These setback requirements, there are some guiding principles that we came up with this, and this is the very last page, page 85 of the zoning code. There's some guiding principles that came into this. Fire safety. We actually had a retired firefighter come to a couple of our meetings and talk to us about some of these things. As far as fire safety goes, you have this, can you guys imagine a situation where everyone, 4 property owners build sheds in the same corner and then keep all of this flammable spray paint and gasoline and starting fluid and lawnmower stuff out there? That's just waiting for a spark to ignite an entire, 4 sheds worth of a fire. You also have some unregulated mobile home parks. They're not necessarily defined by law as mobile home parks, but even the Plains Fire Chief has said that in all likelihood, on some of the places on Plains, on Clinton Street or McDonald Street, some of those trailers are so close together that it could possibly have a domino effect if you didn't have more space between them. We don't want someone else's fire to spread to another adjacent property. So again, we have one of our guiding principles, fire safety. Right-of-way access. I'm sure the township trustees are jumping for joy when they talk about being able to access and maintain some of the ditches and allow for water runoff. When you talk about someone else, I think Sean mentioned earlier, the ability for ambulances to get in and get in and out of certain areas. Alleyways. There are many open alleyways in the Plains, and we need to make sure if those are not closed that we maintain them so that they can be open in the future. Preservation of green space. We don't want houses stacked on top of each other, on top of each other, on top of each other. We want to leave a little bit of room for nature. We also want to leave a little bit of room on a very flat area for water for rainfall to be absorbed into the ground instead of to flood us all out, which is possible on a very flat area. We like looking out at green space and seeing birds and areas like that. So that's one of the other reasons why we have the setbacks structured the way they are. It would concern me if my neighbors had RVs, large work vehicles parked in their yard. And as you see, the code addresses that. First of all, you can park it on a driveway. That's one thing. Another thing is you can park it parallel to the adjacent structure. You can park it in the back. But many people do not find an excess of RVs on someone's property appealing. It certainly, again, diminishes property values, makes your house harder to sell. So we ask you that respect your neighbor. If you're going to store an RV, we would like for you to make a hedge, essentially. Put up a fence so that it respects your ability to have the recreational pursuit that you want, but also some of your neighbor's property rights. And again, the rest of the commission, feel free to jump in. I'm just sensing I need to hurry up. I would like to see more of the following in the Plains. More dine-in restaurants. The code allows these in B1 and B2 districts. So along the 682 corridor, along Johnson Road corridor, down by Eclipse, across from the Messenger. We would like to see more single-family homes. The zoning map reflects the value of families and keeping families in our community. And you see that much of the map is zoned single-family homes. More trees and landscaping. There's screening required in many places, such as between business districts and a residential area. There's also things like a business can't take their entire driveway and make it pavement, essentially. They will need to make a couple flower beds, or it's, I believe, a 3-foot section of bed. again, so that it's not a concrete paradise here in the plains. We want, again, some aesthetic value to stay in the plains. We like our beautiful town. And more retail stores. Those are principally permitted in B1 and B2 with few conditions, including, as long as you meet those conditions, that's what it means, with including the setback, parking conditions, and landscaping requirements. So it would be a challenge to put a giant Meijer or Walmart in certain portions of the plains off of 682. But you could put a big box store across from the Messenger if you wanted, on the hilltop across from the Messenger, as long as you met those certain conditions. We did add rental housing, and the motto that we kind of went by was health, safety, and welfare of the folks that are living in rental housing. Sometimes those folks need protections, and there's no other authority really to give them sorts of protection. So we think we put in some very reasonable, justifiable protections for people who are living in rental housing. For example, there is nothing in a code right now that says you have to have egress from a bedroom. We added that. Alarms, CO2, carbon monoxide alarms. There's nothing that says the property has to be structurally sound. You could have a leaky roof and it's just between you and your landlord. We don't think that's necessarily a fair fight for many people in the plains. So that's why we want to protect some of those residents who are renting. Stairs don't have to be sound currently, but they do under our rental housing code. And railings will have to be sound in the sense of, like, you can't lean against it and shake it and hope no one leans against it. You know, we want it to actually protect people, to protect children that might be playing on a porch, for instance. Operable doors with locks. Again, we had lots of people in our survey worried about safety, and this addresses it. You have a kitchen, a real kitchen. We have problems in our community related to health and obesity. And one of the best ways to fight that is a kitchen where you can actually prepare food. So we want that to be a requirement in rental housing. And cleanable counters. This is basic hygiene. If you have a counter made with plywood and you cut up some chicken on it, it's a hard time to get that clean. You know, we want a minimum of 6 feet. I don't think that's breaking too many banks to have 6 feet of food preparation, countertop. A stove, a range, a fire extinguisher available in the kitchen. Bathrooms, we would like, sorry about that. We would like ventilation in the bathrooms. We don't want to encourage the growth of mold. We want, again, our tenants to be healthy. We want to protect them against electrocution by having GFCI outlets installed. And, you know, basic things like hot and cold water in a rental unit. So as we kind of wrap up here, I just want to remind the public that we will have a public comment period. Questions are limited to 3 minutes, depending on kind of the number of the audience. And with 24 people, I think we can stick to 3 minutes. And it doesn't seem like we can have a sign up officially or a sign up order on here. Or do you guys want to use the chat function to have a sign up order? I think probably for public record keeping, if we used a chat function, which is in the bottom right of your kind of interface, we could be able to put your name down and in an order, and we'd allow those folks to speak in that order. Does that sound good for the zoning commissioners? If I can make that happen?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. What to expect next? Once we hear your concerns, the commission will take the public comments under consideration, meet to discuss them. We will also post the survey results online and probably this video that I'm taking right now as well. If you want information faster, please follow our Facebook page. We're actually up to like 600 people, I think. So that's pretty cool. Maybe I lied right there. Maybe it's 300, but I don't know. Hopefully it will be 600 after this meeting. And you can also find information very easily accessible on the township, the newly designed township webpage. So I encourage you to check that out if you haven't yet. Okay, with that, I'm gonna stop the screen share. There's no new participants. There are some folks that have already kind of put a chat, use the chat function to put themselves in there. It looks like Ian from Athens has a comment. And we might want to go ahead and address Ian's comment at this time. Sean, does that sound good? Sean, are you with me?
There you go. You had me muted.
Not my intention.
Yes, Ian asked if there were fees associated with rentals, and there would be fees associated with rental. The Plains isn't big enough to have a full-time rental officer, so therefore working with the township trustees, we would probably have a part-time officer, maybe share it with a different village or township. So yeah, to pay for that officer who would have to go around and do rental inspections, there would be fees associated with rentals.
So this is when Steve, I've heard Steve jump in and say also that when you talk about how this could be enforced, how zoning could be enforced, it could be enforced by the township hiring a zoning enforcement agent, or it could be enforced with the township partnering with Athens Code Enforcement or Nelsonville Code Enforcement. I think I'm still right on that. Steve, can you give me a thumbs up if I explain that accurately? He gave somewhat. Okay. Steve, do you want to jump in there and explain that?
Well, I'll just give you an example. There will be a need for some kind of enforcement officer. The question then would be, would the township hire their own employee? Would that be a part-time or a full-time employee? You could subcontract that work out to other cities such as Nelsonville or Athens, or you could contract with a private agency. But just to give you an example, there are 4 housing officers in Athens right now inspecting about 5,200 rental units. They get around to every one of them, hopefully once a year. So it would probably be a little problematic to pull an existing officer out of Athens to do these inspections. Help me out, Brian, if I'm right or wrong on this too. As I've reviewed the proposal, you have to have an initial inspection to get a rental permit, and then you have an annual inspection also. That's the language that I've seen there so far. Bob Eichenberg and I have gone back and forth a little bit. We're fairly close on the number of rental units we believe that there are on the Plains. And help me out right off the top of your head. I'm gonna say 1,500. Does that sound about right?
I thought it was 900. I think 1,500 might be the total, or 16. Okay. It was 54% of the units in the Plains are rental. I know that.
So each officer in Athens has to inspect like 1,500 rentals a year. They do accomplish that. So if we're talking about half that amount, we're essentially talking about half an employee, say from the city of Athens. If you do it that way, you don't have to pay the benefits. It's part of your contract cost. And that's just for rental inspection. When you're talking about the zoning part of it, you're also talking about permit issuance for new construction, renovations, use permits. So you've got another angle of enforcement there, another part of the enforcement department. And then you'd have to be able to respond to complaints also, because a lot of these things are not going to fall necessarily under permitting or the housing inspection part of it. So you're going to have a person that can also respond to a junk car complaint or a high grass complaint, or those kinds of things that are a little bit different. The ability to fund this also will have to come out of the township general fund. Unlike villages and cities, we don't have the ability to ask for an income tax, which goes a long way in cities and villages toward funding non-levy type activities. To give you an example, in the city of Athens too, and those of you that may not know where my comments are coming from, I was the director of code enforcement in Athens for 14 years. And my department budget at the time was about $750,000 with 5 inspectors, clerical staff. So that's kind of part of my background. I did that for 9 years in the city of Nelsonville also, but I was a one-man operation in Nelsonville. It was a little bit different. The costs incurred can be reflective, and I saw one of the comments about reflected in the fees that you charge. I was involved in a common pleas court case where the Athens County Property Owners Association, the Landlords Association, sued the city over increase in rental fees from $50. The proposal was to go to $65. The Landlords Association took the city to court over that. It ended up, Mayor Abel was contracted with a company called Maximus from Cleveland, and our direct and indirect costs for the city were about $90. And so council immediately raised it from 65 to 90. So yes, there are fees involved, and the court case says you can charge what it costs to administer a program, but you cannot make money off of it. Any shortfall, if you take your total costs, subtract your fees, whatever they may be, any difference has to be made up by your general fund so as we're looking at permit fees, I guess what we're looking at is a balance here. We don't, as trustees and as a township, don't have excessive amounts of general revenue to cover much of that difference. So that'll be something, to work out. That's something that we'll discuss as trustees, I think, about what kind of a system may have been placed to us to administer. So it'll get a little more dicey, honestly, when the costs come into play too. But there will be costs for sure.
Brian, this is Bob Eichenberg. If I can just chime in here, just to clarify our numbers, what I estimated were 939 occupied units in the proposed zoning district. 45.8% of those are owner occupied, so 430 units are owner occupied. 54.2% are renter occupied, so that's 509 units. So those numbers are a little more manageable.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And again, I'd just like to remind everyone that even a $60 or Steve said a $90 fee spread across rent in 12 months, it's about an extra $8 a month added onto someone's rent to make that up to the landlord. But you're getting a lot of protection in exchange for that $8 a month as a tenant. And I think that's something that tenants, especially because tenants can vote on the zoning code, that tenants need to keep in mind as well. It looks like, do I see anybody else? I have a feeling some people might not know how to use the chat function. It's at the bottom middle if you're on a desktop or Chromebook.
Since we haven't gotten any more chat questions, can you just unmute everybody and see what questions come up?
If we unmute everyone and everyone talks at the same time, it's going to be pretty chaotic. I can certainly go down the list up here, and if that's something that seems palatable.
How about if somebody wants to, you can hold up your hand too by clicking on yourself and pushing a button that says hold up my hand, and then maybe Brian can unmute you that way.
Or you can legitimately just hold up your hand and I, the teacher, will gladly call on you.
So, but yeah, I think the chat would be the easiest way to start questions. But like I say, you can also just push that button that says raise hand.
Okay, we got a hand up.
Yeah.
someone entitled iPhone SS. Would you mind identifying yourself?
I believe, hopefully it's me, Steve Sloan. I'm a local attorney with Malika Gall Sloan and Sillery. My client here is NML Gallia LLC. The sole member and the managing member of that LLC is Harold Laughlin, who I have with me. Harold is a longtime business person, has done quite a bit of development in this area. NML owns the roughly 240 plus acres across 33 over in there where the water tower is. You know, Harold and I have talked a lot about this, and I think Harold over the years has tried to be very sensitive to the community and understands certainly the impetus for looking at zoning in the plains. But for the area that his LLC owns, a very large area, we just don't believe it's part of the plains. We're not sure what motivated jumping 33 to go over to that area, but we don't think historically it's been considered part of the plains. We actually think the corner of the property involved is in Dover Township. You know, Harold wants to develop this. As I say, I think his track record has been that he tries to be careful and prudent in what he does. We already are within the 3-mile limit of Athens, and for certain development would be guided by that. One of our concerns is that when you talk to developers, be it good or bad, the truth is there is a hesitancy when they find out an area is zoned, and particularly here, whether you call it commercial or business, that may also give the developer the wrong idea as to what the area can and can't be used for. You know, this is not something that we really want to oppose because we believe there's certainly some merit to it, but you know, we may feel that we're put in a position where we're forced to oppose it. We just think, you know, when the map was drawn, a lot of area was taken in that there was no real reason to.
Well,
Sean, I think as a developer yourself, you would be a great person to answer that.
yeah, that whole area there is clearly well set up for what we considered. I think we zoned almost all of that, almost the most open, which was B3. In B3, you can do almost anything you wanted to, and that was the idea, was that side of it would end up being probably big business anyway down the residential. I mean, and that's the whole point of having a zoning commission is you can also, you know, if Harold wants to put in single family residence, then he can put in single family residence. I think we made it as open as it's possible to do. I think that also one of the big things is if you just look at how the plains has grown and how Athens has grown, clearly, yeah, that area may not be considered part of the. I know I consider that area part of the plains. I mean, it's just right across the highway, but it's certainly part of the same group, and it's serviced by the Plains Water and Sewer District, I believe. So, and so we had to take into account not just the very center, the very densest part of the plains, but also where we think growth is going to occur. And certainly growth is occurring there. And we also took into account what we thought would probably go in there, and we zoned it probably the most liberal because there's not a lot of residential near there.
Am I unmuted or muted or?
You are good to talk, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we just, you know, obviously respectfully disagree. And, you know, as I've only had a small opportunity to look at the survey results and that and the comments, but, you know, it really appears that what a lot of the people are talking about are what I would traditionally call code enforcement issues. That appears to be really the overwhelming concern. And I don't disagree that those may be issues that certainly need to be in some manner. It's just that as I say, I think, the property there, it's sometimes referred to as the old Gammisfelder property, really virtually has no neighbors. And as I say, the obstacle of a newly zoned area, when you're attempting, particularly in today's world, people think it's easy to entice developers to come into this area, and that really is not the fact. And I think going forward for the next probably 5 years, we're going to be living with the fact that it's even going to be more difficult, and a lot will hinge upon what's being done at the university. And believe it or not, whether they are going to develop in the Plains area or Nelsonville or out in Albany, they still look to what's going on at the university. We just think that under all the circumstances, again, there's not real justification for including it within the area, and that's our position.
Well, I guess, like I say, I feel like we disagree with that, but certainly we'll take it up at the next meeting and discuss that area again. Say we tried to make it so that it wasn't some strange-looking gerrymandered section, and we tried to take into account what things were now and what we expected them to be, and that's why we zoned that. Such a B3 is about as liberal as you're going to get. I mean, there's short of industrial, so I think it's I think that it leaves it well open to them, and certainly being adjacent to the plains, it's also an area which is being currently developed, so therefore certainly something that we should be considering zoning for.
So
but we'll talk about the next meeting. Please feel free to attend. It's also a public meeting.
Just so everyone who is in attendance realizes what's being discussed, and I believe it's this piece of property right here. And then
Correct.
Also, Mr. Laughlin also, I believe, owns access right down here next to the road.
Correct. That's correct. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening to our position.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And just so everyone, we didn't really get into this detail earlier, but just so everyone realizes, your R1 is your most restrictive, whereas your B2, like this, would be your least restrictive. You can pretty much have anything that is permitted in one of these areas in a B2. So you could have, I saw Mr. Laughlin's website a while ago, and you could have assisted living, you could have apartments, you could have single family residences, you could have big box stores, you could have restaurants with a few conditions. And I just wanted to put that out there. I look forward to seeing what Mr. Laughlin is going to be doing with that property, and I appreciate him trying to bring business and jobs to the plains.
Yeah, it was one of the survey things that a lot of people were looking for, is to me not just a residential community, but also to have active businesses. And so that's why we looked at that area and said, wow, that's a great place for active business. So.
Yeah, one last comment. I did notice, I reviewed all the minutes from all the various meetings you've had, and really, I think there was maybe one time that area was even mentioned. The vast majority, I'd say 95% of the comments really concerned things in what I think we would all consider the old Plains area, mainly the 682, but then you go out from 682 in all directions, the same off Johnson Road. And really the overwhelming number of comments concerned those areas. But again, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sloan, for participating. We appreciate it. And again, I know I responded to your email, but if you can figure out a way how to make that Excel sheet look more manageable, I would love your help on that.
Very good. And do I need to do anything now to mute me? I guess I should mute.
I'll go ahead and mute. There you go. You're good. Okay, I'll stop the screen share so I can see what other people have in mind. We got a comment from Fred. Thank you, Fred. Does anyone want to raise their hand and speak up? Sure, Mr. Eichenberg, go ahead.
Just as a point of clarification, Brian, from our meeting, and for folks who weren't tuned into that, that happened between 6 and 6:30, was also a public meeting. The point came up about B1 districts and noise, and I did a quick review, and in B1 districts, loudspeakers are not allowed. I had mentioned, we did talk about decibel levels in another section of the code. And in my review, I was reminded that was about wind turbines. And if you have a wind turbine on your property, 20 decibels at the property line was the noise level. So as it stands now in a B1 district, loudspeakers are not allowed.
Well, I think we were talking about it in the context of could somebody put a McDonald's into a B1? And the idea is that, well, it was a conditional use, so that if the lot line setbacks were fine, you had a big enough lot and you could manage to pull it all off with the ingress and egress, and that one of the conditions could be, okay, well, clearly they're going to want to drive through. So. Are there any other questions or hands held up, Brian?
Does not look like it from my side.
Couple more comments on housing.
Sure,
Okay.
Mr. Pearson.
Yeah, the housing codes in Nelsonville and Athens are completely separate titles. You've got a zoning code and a housing code. They're not combined. So to be real honest with you, this is one of the first times I've seen a combination of both in the same document. And another thing I'd like to bring up too, there was some comment about the inability of renters to have any kind of recourse against negligent landlords. The county health department has a document called Safe Housing Code of Athens County, and the health department has basically the same type of document. If there are problems in rental housing anywhere in the whole county, I'm going to be real honest with you, their ability to respond is not the greatest because there's only 2 people in the environmental division that do inspections. I leaned on them heavily when I worked in Nelsonville because Nelsonville at the time didn't have a housing code. So a lot of the work that I had to do to address rental housing complaints, I had to run through the health department. So I just didn't want anybody to think that there was no recourse for a renter right now in Athens County. There is, it's not going to be nearly as responsive, let's say, it would be if you lived in Nelsonville or if you lived in Athens. And again, it's a function of manpower, financing, and political willingness. So there's a combination of things there that have to be, kind of blended together to make the whole thing work.
Okay.
I would also like to emphasize that right now, health department's resources are stretched pretty darn thin with anything related to pandemics or health or anything. The pandemic has really stretched health departments.
Well, the county health department has such a huge platter of things on there. I remember the city of Athens, I don't know if this is still true, but I think the city of Athens, we were doing a fill permit. For some odd reason, the fill permit ended up going through the health department, which was just weird, but it seems like the health department has just a tremendous amount of stuff that's put on them. So
right, yeah. The state administrative code does put fill permits in general, statewide, in health departments. The main reason for that, though, is because there needs to be some guarantee that it's not becoming a sanitary landfill.
Oh, I see.
That's kind of the hook right there. Believe it or not, when I worked in Nelsonville, I didn't have anything like that, so I used the health department on it, and I invented the form that the health department uses. So it's a very simple thing to do. Kind of comment what you said there too, Sean. For example, the city of Athens has a land development ordinance that anytime you develop, anytime you break ground on anything, there's a whole other set of rules that kick in. So yeah. This is not nearly as strict as something like that might be.
I think for the public record, though, too, it's important that people realize we did work with Assistant Prosecutor Saunders on whether to move forward with putting a rental section in. And, he said he thought it would be okay to do that.
Right. Another real quick comment too, the township does have the ability by state statute to address junk vehicles right now. We can do that. But again, it's a matter of having the staffing level to do that. Same thing with tall grass. We can address adult entertainment establishments, skill-based games establishments. So there are a few things that are akin to zoning that townships can do now. It's very limited though. So, obviously the things that we could do, like addressing junk and junk vehicles, this would, just reinforce, I guess, that in a certain area, that is a higher priority than it might be, otherwise. Think about how many junk vehicles there are. Just drive out through the county and see how many junk vehicles there are. Where would we even start? But this would then, I guess, as a trustee, show me that the citizens of Athens Township Plains have a higher interest, and then therefore we would, address complaints there a little more quickly, obviously.
One more thing I wanted to bring up was grandfathering. Is because I heard this question from a couple of people, is that if they already have a use that would not be allowed, let's say you have a contractor yard in the middle of an R1 district, that's fine. Grandfathering, Ohio is a grandfather state, which means that if you're using it as a contractor's yard in the middle of an R1 district, you get to continue to use it as a contractor's yard. If your porch is sticking out into the right of way and violates the setback, your porch can continue to stick out in the right of way and violate the setback. There's just the code doesn't change things from the way they are right now. So you're not going to have to shave the corner off your house to meet setback requirements or tear down your fence. It's an important thing for people to know is that if you have something that turns up that's not in compliance with the code, you get to continue to use it. So
Piggybacking on that, if this does pass at the ballot and becomes law, one of the first big projects that the trustees will have to address is identifying all the non-conforming uses. So there really would need to be an inventory for legal standing, for legal purposes, of identifying all those legal non-conforming uses. When you are a legal non-conforming use, you have different development rights or different development regulations than if you were just starting from scratch. So there is that protection built in for non-conforming uses and essentially another layer of administration. Just so you know too, a lot of that, when you expand a non-conforming use or when you have to appeal for some reason, there would also need to be established a board of zoning appeals. The trustees, just as they appointed a zoning commission, would also have to appoint a board of zoning appeals. It's a separate body, separate function, and just another administrative layer that comes into play if this would go to the ballot pass. Those are non-paid positions too. Those are volunteered positions. I actually started as a volunteer zoning commissioner in Bern Township in Fairfield County in 1982. So that was my first toe in the door.
Mr. Saunders, your name came up. Did you feel the need to add anything? I just wanted to make sure you had the opportunity.
No, everything that you guys have said has been correct. Discussing the grandfather, and I have worked with the health department as well as the sheriff's office dealing with junk vehicles outside, obviously, Athens Township. And it is a process, and it's, I know the sheriff's office is stretched thin right now, so enforcement-wise, it's very difficult. And I think if we go forward and it is successful, I think it'll help tremendously with the junk vehicle issue in the Plains.
I would just like to clarify, junk vehicles on a 40-acre plot of land off Vore Ridge, which is also in Athens Township, I think is a very different thing than a junk vehicle across from, 30 feet across from your house in the Plains.
and also, as I know you pointed this out pretty extensively, Brian, but what a junk vehicle is, it's not that car that you're working on and building. It's something that's got trees growing through it. So
Yeah, it's very, very narrowly defined in the Ohio Revised Code, which you guys have used. And in fact, a couple of times that I've gone out with the health department and the sheriff's office looking at certain vehicles, I've had to tell them that that's not a junk vehicle under the Ohio Revised Code. You know, one person's junk is another person's treasure.
Right. Okay.
Another thing to think about too, nuisances in general are things that are visible from the public right of way. So you can't go onto somebody's property and kind of go through their backyard and go, oh, look at that. Normally an officer's only going to respond to something that's visible from your property or from the public right of way.
Yes, please do not go on someone's property and do that.
No.
Thank you, Zach. Zach, I'm gonna mute you. Just please feel free to raise your hand if you want to jump in.
So are there any more questions from the public? Just please raise your hand or send something through chat. Oh, come on. Going once. Going twice. Going 3 times. Okay, then. I would like to call this public meeting of the Athens Township Zoning Commission. Brian can't just stop.
I always do this. I'm sorry, but our normal scheduled meeting doesn't happen next week. It would be 2 weeks from now for us to discuss the things that came up tonight. However, we only scheduled it that way for availability of the Plains Library. Now that we have Zoom and can host public meetings on Zoom, we can give 24 hours notice and have a public meeting on the 6th, or not a public, public meeting, not a public hearing, a public meeting on the 6th. So if we post it to the library door and put things out through the website and Facebook like we have, we could have a emergency meeting, I guess, or something like that on the 6th to discuss this. That would move the process potentially to the Regional Planning Commission faster. So before we shut this meeting down with Bob's thumb in the air, I'd like to propose
Warren has his hand up too. So.
Oh, and Warren wants to jump in.
I would just like to commend the Athens Township trustees and all the people on the commission, Mr. Eichenberg, that's jumped in and give his guidance to offering help for the future of the Plains. It's just a shame that we're a divided community and not all elected officials are willing to step up and do what they're supposed to be doing, representing the people. So my hat is off to you all as individuals for the effort you're doing in trying to make our community a better community for all of us to enjoy. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate that.
Thank you, Warren.
So, I believe we can make that motion to have the meeting or to call the meeting for next Wednesday before we get off here. I'd like to make that motion.
Do I hear a second? All right.
I'll second it. Yes.
All right. Jones votes yes.
Deering, yes. I think Mike's muted. Sorry about that, Mike. And Mr. Robinson somehow is muted.
Well, I'm not. So I vote yes.
I vote yes.
Okay.
Mike, for some reason, Mike, it's not going up. Can I get a thumbs up or thumbs down? Oh, thumbs up. We're going to take that as the affirmative. Okay. Well,
the next Wednesday we'll have an extra special meeting of the Plains.
Extra special meeting on May 6th, so we can discuss comments from the public hearing, and that will take place on Zoom. And we will get that information out to the public and post it as legally required at the public library.
Right.
I think we're good, Mr. Saunders. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
All right, let's try this again. Is there any other more comments, either through the chat or hold your hand up from the public?
I have another comment on process now, just for a little bit of clarification. I think Bob mentioned this previously, and Bob, watch me here, make sure that I'm accurate on this. The recommendation of the Planning Commission, the Zoning Commission will go to the Regional Planning Commission next, and there's a 20-day window where they have the ability to respond or just tacitly approve it by not commenting at all. I've already talked to Paul Logue. He's the Athens City Planner and President of the Regional Planning Commission, and Jesse Powers, who's the Regional Planner. So they're aware of the process that's going to be happening now. More than likely, the Regional Planning Commission will appoint a special committee to do the review and then make a report back to the full commission. I'm secretary to the Regional Planning Commission. Warren is a voting member of the Regional Planning Commission. So, you know, in those respects, we'll probably have to recuse ourselves from any discussion at that level, but that's the next process. So just wanted everybody to know that on a regional level, the county planner and the president of the Regional Commission are aware of the process. I keep them updated.
I would like to throw in that I don't think Warren has to excuse himself living in Dover Township, so he would not be affected by.
I guess you're right. For some, he comes to our community improvement committee meetings. He's a resident on this side of the line, I guess.
All right. Ted wants to chime in.
Sure. Let me unmute Ted. Ted, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hey, guys, I just wanted to thank y'all for your work. And shoot, whether I agree with what you've done or disagree with you, it doesn't really matter, because I've always I've felt comfortable that whatever we come up with here has to go in front of the voters, and they're the ones that ultimately at the end of the day got to decide this. Yep. It's awfully easy for me to sit here and shoot holes in the work you guys have done, which is a commendable amount, and I truly appreciate the work you've done. I see some things where there's an awful big charge in a lot of this, a lot of things to happen, and the funding is of making this all work is going to end up being an issue at the end of the day, and just a reminder to keep this all in mind, because everything is, we've said many times about different agencies and everybody being stretched pretty thin, and we're getting used to doing more with less, but sometimes it turns into where you end up doing less with less, and just always keep that in mind.
For sure. Thank you, Ted. And I wanted to let you know, and I meant to say this earlier, that we actually have reached out to other township zoning enforcement agencies. Like, for example, I reached out to Devola in Washington County, right outside of Marietta. That's what we based a lot of our code off of. And we have some hints that we would be happy to share with the township trustees when that time comes. And I would be happy to keep calling around to other trustees and look at their fee structures. Devola sent me their fee structure, and I can pass it on to you. And they gave me some good reasoning for that fee structure, and I can pass that information on to the trustees. Because ultimately, you guys, and I've unmuted Mr. Baker too, you guys are going to be deciding that aspect of it and how it's enforced, I believe.
All right. Thank you, sir. We'll be glad to look at any information you can share.
Sure.
Okay. So,
Mr. Baker, did you want any? I unmuted you, Mr. Baker. I just, if there was anything you wanted to say.
No, I just appreciate everything you guys have done, and I pretty much feel the same way as Ted does, that it really comes down to money and manpower for us. I mean, we're getting kind of thin, and you know, we've had 4 employees, we're down to 3 now, and we've picked up some other projects, as in mowing cemeteries. I mean, it's just going to come down to money and manpower. I just hope things work out for you, and we'll do the best we can.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Baker, Mr. Linskett, Mr. Pearson, for your support along this entire process. Thank you to everyone who came today, and thank you for your patience with me operating